Welcome to Family Secrets Unveiled, where we dig into the shadows and pull back the curtains on the most chilling stories you've never heard. Today, we're not talking about a simple family quarrel or a little white lie. We're talking about a betrayal so deep, so twisted, it could only be born from a heart of stone and a mind of pure malice. This is a story that begins with a beautiful bride, a perfect day, and a single, devastating kiss that shattered everything she thought she knew. Her name was Amelia, 32, an architect with a heart as vibrant as the city skyline she helped design. She was marrying Liam, the one, or so she believed. Liam, a man with a quiet strength and a smile that could calm her every fear, a historian who cherished the past and, in doing so, promised her a future. Their love story was a tapestry woven with shared lattes on rainy mornings, late-night conversations about the stars, and the unspoken understanding that they were each other's home. The wedding day had finally arrived. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the hushed excitement of their 100 guests. Amelia, in her custom-made lace gown, felt a serene kind of joy. It was the joy of a woman who had found her soulmate. A feeling of completeness. The ceremony was a blur of soft words and loving glances. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a wave of relief and pure happiness washed over her. It was time for the kiss. The moment she had imagined 1,000 times. She closed her eyes, ready for the gentle, familiar press of Liam's lips. But as their mouths met, a jolt, sharp and wrong, shot through her. The kiss was too forceful. It lacked the gentle, familiar rhythm of Liam's touch. A cold dread began to creep up her spine. She pulled back, her eyes flying open. And that's when she saw it. It wasn't him. The man standing before her, the man she had just married, was not Liam. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, not Liam's deep, warm brown. His lips were thin and hard, not full and soft. This was a stranger. A chilling, impossible stranger. Panic, cold and sharp as glass, splintered her perfect day. She looked out at the guests, at the sea of smiling, oblivious faces. Had no one else noticed? Her gaze landed on the crowd, searching for a familiar face, for a signal, a sign, anything. And then she saw him. Her fiancé, Liam. Standing at the back of the church, his face a mask of horror. His eyes, the eyes she knew and loved, met hers. And in that silent exchange, a terrifying truth began to form. He wasn't the one who had just stood at the altar. But if he was there, who was this man? The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken terror. The man holding her hand smiled, a slow, predatory smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "My love," he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly imitation of Liam's, "we're finally married." The words were a venomous promise, a twisted declaration of ownership. The nightmare had only just begun. The blissful wedding day had transformed into a cage, and she had just walked right into it, led by an imposter, a specter of her fiancé. And she was trapped, standing before 100 witnesses, all unknowingly complicit in her own destruction. Her mind raced, a frantic search for an explanation, for a way out. Was this a sick joke? Was it a misunderstanding? But the cold, hard reality of the situation was undeniable. The man before her was a perfect, sinister counterfeit. Every detail was just a little bit wrong. His suit was a shade darker. His hair was styled slightly differently. Small, subtle changes that in the whirlwind of the ceremony, she had failed to notice. But the kiss, that was the one thing that couldn't be faked. It was a signature of the soul, and this man's signature was one of ice. She felt a shiver, not of cold, but of a deep, primal fear. What had happened to Liam? Who was this man, and what did he want with her? The answers, she knew, were buried in the shadows, waiting for her to dig them up, and she was already standing at the edge of a very dark, very deep hole. The moment stretched into an eternity. Amelia's perfect world had cracked, and the man holding her hand was the one who had shattered it. She felt his grip tighten, a silent, menacing warning. She couldn't scream. She couldn't run. The dozens of eyes on her, expecting a picture-perfect moment, kept her frozen. She glanced back at Liam, her true fiancé, and saw him start to move, his face a mix of terror and rage. But before he could take a step, two large men, impeccably dressed, but with the hard eyes of bouncers, moved to block his path. It was a perfectly choreographed maneuver, a confirmation that this was not a prank, but a meticulously planned abduction. The imposter, with a disarming smile, leaned in close, his breath smelling of mint and deceit. "Don't make a scene, darling," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "We have a long and beautiful life ahead of us. And you wouldn't want to ruin our wedding photos, would you?" The cold threat in his words was unmistakable. He was in control. And she was his captive. The reception was a nightmarish blur. Every toast felt like a condemnation. Every smile was a lie. Her new husband, whose name she now knew was Elijah, played the part of the doting groom with terrifying precision. He laughed at the right times, held her hand just so, and whispered sweet nothings that felt like sandpaper against her skin. Later that night, as the final guests trickled out, leaving them alone in the cavernous ballroom, the mask finally slipped. Elijah led her to a waiting black car. Inside, the luxury was suffocating. He didn't speak a word, the silence between them a living, breathing thing. He was no longer the charming groom, but a predator who had finally cornered his prey. As the car sped away, leaving the city lights behind, Amelia's terror finally gave way to a cold, calculating resolve. She was in a cage, but she wouldn't be a docile bird. She had to understand the why. Why her? Why Liam? And who is this man? They arrived at a sprawling, isolated estate, shrouded in darkness and old money. The house was a museum of a life she didn't know, portraits of stern-faced ancestors, heavy velvet curtains, and an oppressive silence. In the master bedroom, the cold decor was a stark contrast to the passionate life she had imagined with Liam. Elijah finally spoke. "You're a part of the family now, Amelia. A very important part." He held up a delicate silver locket, one that looked just like the one she'd inherited from her grandmother. "Your grandmother, she was a woman of secrets. Deep, dark secrets." The mention of her grandmother, a woman she had idolized, sent a jolt of shock through her. Amelia had always believed her grandmother, Eleanor, to be a kind, gentle soul. But as Elijah opened the locket, a small, faded photograph fell out. It was a picture of Eleanor, not as a grandmother, but as a young woman, standing next to a man who bore an uncanny resemblance to Elijah. The man in the photograph had the same pale blue eyes and the same unsettling smirk. "This is my grandfather, Julian," Elijah said, a faint smile on his lips. "And your grandmother was his." A story as old as time, a love that was forbidden. Julian was a man of great power, but Eleanor, she chose another. She ran away, married a man she loved, and had your mother. But my family, the Aldridges, never forget. The revelation was a hammer blow. Her perfect, idyllic family history was a lie. Her grandmother hadn't been a quiet homemaker. She had been a part of something grand, something dangerous. And the man who had abducted her, this Elijah, was the grandson of the man her grandmother had spurned. This wasn't a random act of madness. It was a twisted form of revenge, a way to reclaim what the Aldridge family believed was theirs. The wedding, the imposter, the stolen kiss, it was all a meticulously crafted trap, a dark mirror of a love story that had been denied a generation ago. Amelia was now a pawn in a feud she had no idea existed. The quiet life she had built was a house of cards, and one dark kiss had just brought it all tumbling down. She was now a part of a family secret she never knew she had, and the Aldridges had just claimed their bride. The question wasn't what they wanted, but what they were willing to do to get it. And she was about to find out. The house became a gilded cage. For days, Amelia was a prisoner, the silent, watchful gaze of the Aldridge family's staff a constant reminder of her helplessness. But she was an architect. She was a planner. And every plan needs an escape route. She began to observe, to listen, piecing together the twisted mosaic of the Aldridge family's history. She learned that Julian Aldridge wasn't just a powerful man. He was a titan of industry, a man who built his empire on secrets and ruthless ambition. And when Eleanor, her grandmother, rejected him for a man of lesser means, it wasn't just a personal slight, it was a public humiliation that haunted him until his dying day. Elijah, his grandson, was the one who had inherited not only his name and fortune, but also his obsessive need for revenge. One evening, Amelia overheard a hushed conversation between Elijah and his mother, a woman with eyes as cold and calculating as her son's. "The girl's family has to be eliminated," his mother hissed. "It's the only way to ensure the legacy is secure." Eleanor's line ends with her. The words were a freezing knife to Amelia's heart. They weren't just after her, they were after her mother, after her family, and after Liam. This wasn't a twisted love story anymore, it was a cold-blooded extermination. Fueled by a new, desperate kind of courage, Amelia knew she had to act. She managed to slip away from the watchful eyes and found a hidden library, a room filled with leather-bound books and secrets. Her hands trembled as she pulled a dusty tome from a shelf, a family history of the Aldridges. Inside, tucked between the pages, she found a letter, yellowed and fragile with age. It was written by Julian Aldrich himself, to his son, Elijah's father. The letter spoke of a different kind of secret. It wasn't about her grandmother. It was about Liam. "I found a boy," the letter read in a shaky script. "A boy who bears the image of my enemy, the man Eleanor chose. He is weak, easily manipulated. I will use him to get what I want. He will be my legacy's downfall, but I will make sure it is a downfall of my own design." The words were a chilling revelation. It wasn't her family they wanted to destroy, it was Liam's. And they had been planning this for years. They had groomed him, manipulated him, bringing him into their world under the guise of mentorship, a scholarship for his historical research. Liam, in his innocence, had been a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The imposter, Elijah, was the one who had been meant for her all along, a twisted replacement for the man her grandmother had loved. The truth hit her with the force of a tidal wave. The man who had been with her, her fiancé, the love of her life, was not just an innocent bystander. He was the intended victim of a generational revenge plot. The reason he was at the back of the church, the reason he looked so horrified, was not just because his bride was being stolen. It was because he had just realized the full, terrifying scope of the trap he had led them both into. He had been an unwilling accomplice in their own destruction. He was supposed to die. And she, in their plan, was meant to be the widow, the grieving bride who would then be comforted by the man who had orchestrated it all. A perfect, symmetrical, and utterly monstrous plan. Amelia's mind raced. She had to get to Liam. She had to warn him. But as she turned to leave the library, the doors swung open. Elijah stood there, a look of disappointment on his face. "I've underestimated you, Amelia," he said, the mask of charm completely gone, replaced by a cold, hard rage. "You are more like her than I thought. But you have made a grave mistake. You've revealed your hand. And now I have to ensure that all loose ends are tied up. Starting with your Liam." The air crackled with unspoken violence. The final confrontation was at hand. She had a choice to make, a desperate, final gamble to save the man she loved and her family from a family secret that had just been fully, terrifyingly unveiled. The confrontation in the library was a silent standoff, a clash of wills more potent than any physical fight. Elijah's cold rage was a palpable force, but Amelia's fear had transformed into an ironclad resolve. She didn't need a weapon. She had the truth. "You're not just a victim of your grandfather's obsession," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "You're a monster who's chosen to continue his legacy of cruelty. You're trying to reclaim a love that was never yours to begin with, and in doing so, you're destroying a love that was real." The words hit their mark, a flicker of something dark and twisted in Elijah's eyes. It was a raw, primal hurt, a lifetime of being told he was not enough, a lifetime of living in the shadow of his grandfather's ghost. That was her chance. As he recoiled from her words, a momentary break in his composure, she made her move. She darted past him, Her knowledge of the house she had been meticulously studying coming to her aid. She knew the secret passages, the hidden routes. She burst through a back door and into the moonlit grounds. The escape was a desperate, chaotic sprint. The manicured hedges and winding paths that had seemed so beautiful now felt like a labyrinth designed to trap her. She could hear the sounds of pursuit behind her, but she didn't look back. She ran on pure adrenaline, a single thought burning in her mind: Liam. She finally reached the main road, a desolate stretch of asphalt. She saw a pair of headlights in the distance. A car moving slowly, cautiously. It was a silver sedan. It was Liam's car. How had he known? How had he found her? The question was answered a moment later when she saw her mother in the passenger seat. They had been looking for her. They had been trying to find a way in. In that moment, she realized her family wasn't just a part of the past that the Aldridges wanted to erase. They were her strength, her present, her escape. The confrontation with Elijah's men was swift and brutal, but Liam, who had been a quiet historian, had a strength she had never seen before. He fought with a desperate ferocity, a man protecting everything he held dear. They managed to get away, leaving the Aldridge estate and its dark secrets behind, a testament to a legacy of hatred that had finally been broken. The resolution wasn't a neat, tied-up bow. The Aldridges, with their power and connections, ensured that the official story was a simple misunderstanding, a public spectacle they were not willing to let become a public scandal. Elijah was never brought to justice in a court of law, but he was brought to justice in a more profound way. The truth, once revealed, was a poison that corroded the very foundation of his life. He had been so obsessed with recreating his grandfather's love story that he had become a prisoner of it, a hollow man living a life that was not his own. The real victory wasn't in a legal battle, it was in the escape, in the reclaiming of their lives. Years later, Amelia and Liam got married. The wedding was a quiet affair, a small ceremony in a field of wildflowers, with only their closest family and friends. There was no grand spectacle, no hundreds of guests, just a pure, simple celebration of a love that had survived the impossible. The kiss was gentle, familiar, and full of a love that had been tested and had come out stronger. The memory of that day, the day she kissed a stranger, lingered, a dark shadow on the edge of their happiness. But it was also a reminder of what they had overcome, a testament to the fact that their love was not a fragile thing that could be easily broken. It was a love built not on a perfect illusion, but on a terrifying truth. They had faced the darkest parts of the past and had chosen a future built on trust, honesty, and a profound, unwavering commitment to each other. The stories we tell are not just about the triumphs and the happy endings. They're about the secrets that lurk beneath the surface, the darkness we must face to find the light. And this story, the story of Amelia, Liam, and the man who wasn't the groom, is a chilling reminder that some family secrets are buried so deep they threaten to consume everyone in their path. Thanks for joining us on this chilling journey. If this story sent a shiver down your spine, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the shadows. We'll be waiting.